On the screen, you'll see our agenda. This is what we're going to cover tonight. First, we'll talk about the purpose of assessments, and then we'll give an overview of the various assessments that we use yearly and the implications for those assessments. So in other words, how we use the data to make decisions for our boys and girls. Finally, we'll close with some next steps and opportunities for you all to ask questions. So tonight, please feel free to use the Q&A function that you see on the bottom of your screen, as we often do in our town halls. You can drop in questions there. We have various folks from the home office on the line, as well as some of our principals on, and they can answer questions in real time for you. And then at the end, we'll pause and make sure that we've covered and spoken about all of the questions that have come up. We'll be recording tonight's presentation and sharing that with families in our newsletter on Thursday. We'll also provide a one-pager, kind of like a cheat sheet with some of the most important takeaways from tonight. That's in both English and Spanish. That will be in the newsletter. And then lastly, we'll make sure that any additional questions that come up or any information that families need afterwards is available in your chat and choose with your principals in the coming weeks. Okay, a few things to keep in mind before I turn things over to our wonderful experts who are going to talk more about the assessment. So first, we want to make sure that everyone listening tonight walks away with a clear understanding of why we use assessments, what we use, when we use assessments, and then of course, what actions we take as a result of gathering that data. Tonight, we're talking broadly about assessments for students. So please make sure that the questions you're submitting are general questions about the types of assessments and about our schools, not about your specific son or daughter. If you have questions about your son or daughter, please make sure you speak to your child's teacher, and you can always talk to your school leadership team as well. Okay, without further ado, we are so lucky to be joined by two of our public prep instructional coaches tonight, Jill and Libby, who are both former teachers and spent many years in our classrooms, maybe teaching some of your daughters down in the Lower East Side at some point. Now they support all of our public prep academies, and Jill focuses on English language arts and history, while Libby provides guidance in math. They both have administered countless assessments. They know these tests inside and out, and they have a wealth of knowledge on the value of assessments and what they can add to both teaching and learning. So Jill, Libby, why don't I turn things over to you?
Hi families, my name is Libby Meininger and I am a former 4th grade teacher. I taught math at Girls Prep Lower East Side Elementary, and I'm now a math coach with our network, supporting grades 3 to 5 teachers with their math instruction. So I'm really excited to be with you tonight and talk a bit more about assessments.
Hi everyone, I'm Jill Aquila. I'm also excited to be here with you tonight. I am a former 2nd grade teacher from Girls Prep Lower East Side Elementary. And some of you might know me or I look familiar from the summers I spent working as a Springboard site leader with Boys Prep and Girls Prep Bronx. And now I am supporting 3rd through 5th grade in humanities.
Okay, so to get us started, let's first talk about the purpose of assessments. Why do we do assessments anyway? I'm sure many of you hear the word assessment and start to feel a little anxious as you think back to your own experience and your own test taking experience in school. But something that we really want to stress here is that assessments at public prep are not scary. We work really hard and introduce assessments as early as pre-K so that our students don't feel anxious or nervous about sitting for tests, but they see tests and assessments as an opportunity to show what they know, so they feel excited and empowered. And we hope that this takes away some of that scariness that is sometimes associated with testing. So we have 2 big purposes for our assessments. That's gather data on student learning and provide a feedback loop for teachers. So I will talk a bit more about the gathering data on student learning, and then Jill will talk about how we use that feedback. So through our assessments, we're able to get a baseline. So figure out what each student's academic level is at the beginning of the year so that we know our starting point. And then of course we measure progress. We want to see what our students are learning and how they're growing over the school year. And then we do, of course, evaluate achievement. We make a commitment to all of our families at Public Prep, and this is actually from our mission, that our scholars master the ability to read, write, listen, speak, create, and think deeply across disciplines with a particular focus on the science, arts, and math. And assessments help us ensure that we're following through on that mission and delivering on that promise to all of our families.
As Libby mentioned before, our assessments play a really critical role for teachers. We want to make sure that teachers plan their instruction around what students' needs, and they're meeting each individual student where they are. So they can't do that without having a clear data-driven understanding of kids' reading levels, math achievement, and writing ability. The assessments help teachers differentiate the instruction they're delivering. That means they're using what they know from the assessments to determine if and what interventions or small groups that students might need to be able to master a skill. Differentiation means that each student is getting the instruction or task that they need to make growth in that specific skill. Finally, the assessment helped teachers make sense of what's working well in their instruction and in their classroom, so they continue to use those same teacher moves and then also share out best practices with other teachers.
Okay, so now that we know a little bit about the purpose of assessments at Public Prep, we're going to talk through some of the core assessments that we use, and we'll start with the MAP, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. MAP is the computer-based assessment that can be used for grades K to 8, and we at Public Prep take it 3 times a year in the fall, winter, and spring. This fall, grades 2 to 8 took the MAP test, and we're preparing for our winter session, which is coming up in January. And then there'll be one final test in the spring. So a few important things to know about the MAP test. MAP itself stands for Measures of Academic Progress. So this test is really all about evaluating growth. The test is nationally normed, which is awesome. It means that our students' scores can be compared to other students in the same grade across the country, and it's adaptive. So the questions that each student sees will change based on how they answer the previous question. So as you get questions right, the questions actually get harder, which means that like the testing time can vary a little bit. And MAP does look at the areas of math, reading, and language, and it includes a writing section for the upper grades. And you see this data chart on the slide, and something that's really great that we can see in our fall 1920 data to fall 2021, so last fall to this fall, is that we saw overall growth for our students. And this is super exciting, especially when you hear about COVID slide across the country. Our MAP data shows that it's really not here at Public Prep, and that our students are continuing to achieve at really high levels. So after the MAP test is completed, a report is created and shared with families. And this report shows you not only your students' scores and progress, but also comparison, as I mentioned before, to other students in the same grade across the country. So you'll see that in your student's percentile score. So for example, if your student is in the 70th percentile, that means that they're performing higher than 70% of students across the country. And I definitely encourage you to ask your child's teacher for their MAP student profile, which is where you can see all of this great information.
So let's move on to talk about some step testing. I'm sure every single parent here has heard their student talk about step levels and what step level they're on. And so STEP is an individualized reading assessment that helps us gather data on what they're able to accomplish when reading independently. So your scholar might say, I'm on a step 9, or I'm reading from a step level 6. And these numbers come as a result from their STEP testing. This is really important because it gives teachers and families specific reading skills that students need to work on. STEP helps students become independent readers. And at Public Prep, we really want to make sure that all of our scholars are becoming really strong independent readers. STEP gets its name because each step level grows on a skill that they have previously mastered. So they're basically walking up the steps to becoming stronger readers. And each level has different focus points that they will be working on. Something to know about STEP testing is that it's done one-to-one. That means that your scholar's teacher or someone that knows how to administer STEP sits down with that student individually and works through the assessment together. That can involve them reading aloud, reading in their head. For younger kids, it's sometimes practicing rhyming words or identifying letters. In the older grades, they have to be able to synthesize a text and compare two texts. There's also some writing activities on there. So it's a really good way to determine what they're working on and what they're able to accomplish independently. While we do usually STEP test in grades K through 8, this year, because of our remote world, we have completed STEP testing virtually for students in K-2 in September, and we plan to assess students in K through 2 in January, and some third, fourth, and fifth graders as well in January and May. We have decided that we're going to be looking at some other data points for grades 5 and 8, but some students will be tested based on their STEP data in grades 3, 4, and 5. Similar to MAP, STEP is shared on report cards, and you can always check in with your teachers about what reading level they're on, what skills they're working on to accomplish the next step level, and where they should be according to grade level. MAP scores, STEP scores are also shared out with students. As I said before, a lot of kids are really excited about their STEP score. They know those, they know what they're working on. So that's definitely something you can ask your scholar as well as ask the teachers. And something you might have also heard some students talking about stepping out. That means that they have climbed all of the steps and become a really proficient reader. The first 12 steps focus on fiction, and then from step 13 to step 21, they're looking at nonfiction. And once they have passed that step 21 test, they have officially stepped out, and that means they have accomplished, we can count them as proficient readers. So while MAP and STEP are really big benchmark assessments that we use a few times a year, there are other shorter classroom assessments that we use a little bit more frequently to measure progress. Some things you might have heard of are the IA, that's also known as the interim assessment, that's used in humanities or English language arts classes to assess students' reading. And there's the biweekly quizzes or also progress monitoring quizzes that are used in math. These often take place sporadically throughout the year to check students' progress against grade level standards and expectations. So it's a little bit different than the previous two assessments where they're sort of tracking their own individual growth. This is actually tracking how they're doing compared to the standard. These scores are also shared with students so you can track your scholar's progress. These aren't always explicitly included in the report card, but can certainly influence students' overall grades based on how they're doing on these assessments. And there's also, end of unit assessments that are taken, which are incorporated into students' grades.
Great. So another assessment that you probably know is the New York State test. And New York State testing happens every spring, and that's for our students in grades 3 through 8. There's an ELA exam and a math exam. And in grades 4 and 8, students also take a science exam, which historically 90% of our public prep scholars have passed, which is credit to our awesome daily science instruction. These state tests are sometimes what we call like big A assessments because they're really looking for mastery of content. The tests are provided by the state, and there are official bubble sheets that students use to record answers. And since this could potentially be a nerve-wracking experience for students and the stakes are high, we do a series of mock tests in the months leading up to the state test. And the mock math and ELA tests are really meant to simulate the testing experience for everyone. So they help us to know what's on track and what isn't, so we can make changes accordingly. And we've also heard from our students that these tests are really helpful for preparing for the real deal, and they help them feel confident and prepared to sit for the state test. And then just one other note about state tests. The state does share results with families and schools, usually by mail and email, sometime around August. So these tests are really important in understanding our students' achievement, but they're less helpful for us in making decisions because we don't wait until August to evaluate how our students are doing. If we waited until August, we'd be behind in making a lot of decisions, which is why we really rely on those other assessments that we've reviewed.
So throughout our presentation, we've mentioned sort of different timing of when we're having all of these larger assessments, but we wanted to share sort of a brief calendar summarizing the key assessments that we have throughout the year. Hopefully this will help you visualize the focus of the different assessments and when they're happening. So I just want to point out, these are our lengthier assessments. You don't see like classroom assessments because they're woven into our calendar throughout the year. As you can see, as a reminder, the STEP test is pre-K through second, with some 3rd through 5th grade scholars getting tested in the winter and spring. And the state test is there. And I do want to note that as of now, the state does plan to administer the state exams, even if they cannot be in person. Public prep remains in close contact with these people making the decisions. And if anything changes, we will let you know, just as we did last spring. But the hope is that they will do them even if they are not in person.
Okay, so up to this point, we've covered why we assess students and the different assessments that we use. So now let's talk about what we do with that data. One really important decision that we can make with some of our assessment results, particularly with STEP and MAP, is grade level readiness. So we can look at a student's growth throughout the year, see if they're on track, or see if they need some interventions. Some examples of interventions that we use are small groups within a student's daily classes, which helps to target a set of skills. We've also historically used Saturday Academy, and that's just for grades 3 to 8. And that's something that we've done in the past to support students, where we extend learning time to Saturday mornings in the spring. And in some cases, we may consider an additional year of learning if a student is not prepared to move on to the next grade, but that is something that you would talk about with your child's teacher and school leadership team, because those decisions are made on an individual level. And then another decision that we can make using assessments and data is around curriculum and instructional support. So knowing how our students are doing lets us pivot when something isn't working and replicate the things that are working. And so we can look at trends across classrooms and across schools and make decisions that meet the needs of all of our students.
So I know we just threw a lot of information at you about our assessments at Public Prep, and we really hope that it was helpful for you in supporting your scholars learning. As we close our sort of Zoom room tonight, we want you to have at least 3 big takeaways. First, assessments are all about gathering data to support students and teachers. This is a two-way street. We use results not only to see how kids are doing, but also change how teachers support kids so we can maximize growth. Second, MAP and STEP are the big ones. These are the 2 nationally normed assessments we use to get a really good sense of how kids are doing. And even though it's not the most frequent assessment like IAs, they're still really important. MAP and STEP are the ones that we look at to make those big decisions, as they tell us the most information about how teaching and learning is working in our schools. STEP and math are both aligned with the New York State test, so we can use those as indicators of success and mastery to predict a student's success on the state test. And finally, perhaps the most important thing that we hope you take away from us tonight is that communication is key. We really want you to remember that talking to your child's teacher is the best way to know how your student is doing, and what you can do at home to support your scholars. Our teachers have an open door policy and always try to make themselves available for conversations about students' progress. As you prepare for upcoming family teacher conferences, please keep in mind this is a wonderful opportunity to dig into data together, ask questions about your child, and get strategies you can use at home to help them excel. And as you can see on the slide below, there are some questions that you can ask your teachers specifically to make sure that you're getting a good picture of where students are and where they need to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jill and Libby, for sharing all this information. Families, before we get into some questions, and again, I want to remind you all, if you haven't asked a question yet and have one, you can feel free to drop that in the Q&A section or in the chat so we can answer that. Or if you'd rather raise your hand, we can certainly try to answer questions that way as well. But before we get to questions, I just want to, as we always do, remind you that your campus chat and choose are a really great place to get information. I know all of your school leaders are talking about assessments happening on your campus during these chat and choose as well, and they'll have more specific details than what we're giving tonight even. And so they're a really great opportunity, and I'd encourage you to attend where you can. So these are the days and times, and certainly principals, if any of these are wrong, please flag them for us, but I think that they're all right. And families, if you have questions about how to join, you can always reach out to your principal to make sure you have the Zoom link as well. But why don't we move on to questions? So I know, Libby and Jill, if I can put you on the spot, I know there was one question that came up that I want to make sure we address in case there are other families out there as well whose son or daughter has an IEP. How students with IEPs, how do we make sure that they're getting the safe accommodations when they're taking assessments? Can someone speak a little bit to that?
Sure, I can. I know Dr. Kirkland also shared in the chat, but this is also definitely on an individual basis because the accommodations are dependent on what is in that student's IEP, but we take every step to follow the accommodations in each scholar's IEP and make sure that they are receiving the accommodations they need to be successful on all the assessments that we mentioned here.
Thanks, Libby. And I'm going to give Patria a moment as she continues to translate that as well. Patria. Patria, just give me a thumbs up if you're good on your, okay, awesome. There was another question I saw, And that maybe I'll just have Libby, if you can voice over as well on, does MAP dictate where, like which classroom a child goes into? Would we ever use the assessment results to decide, you're going into one classroom versus another?
Corey, I answered that question. The answer is no. It does not impact the class that your child is in. With regards to the topics that are covered on MAP, they might not be covering the same topics that your child might be learning at that particular time in class. Okay?
Great, great. I hope that answers Patrice's question too, yeah. Parents, if you have a question and we haven't answered it, you can feel free to use the little raise hand button as well. And we're happy to take folks off of mute. All right. All right, we got a few questions coming in here. So one question is around the timing of family teacher conference. Dr. Kirkland, if you want to give that answer as well. I think you might have just jumped on it in the chat too.
Yeah, no problem. To be honest, this is very close to the same time that we did it last year. That really not a major jump. Yeah, period. And we hope that everybody is going to be able to attend. It's going to be Wednesday from 1 to 4. I'm sorry, from 4 to 7. Wednesday from 4 to 7. And then Friday, there's no school, so that we can conduct the conferences all day. I think most schools are doing it as early as 8 to 4.
I believe so too. Yes. I'm going to let Patria translate. And then. Yeah, the only other thing I would add on conference timing is, the marking period ended and teachers have been working on, writing up, writing up the report cards and preparing for conferences to make sure that you can have a really comprehensive conversation this week. And there was the Thanksgiving holiday last week, of course, too. So to Dr. Kirkland's point, this is typically the time. It just, we need 2 weeks to prepare to make sure that the time is really meaningful for you all when you meet with your teachers this week.
Corey, I don't mind taking some of these questions. Someone said don't mention their name, so I promise I won't mention your name, parent. Which one is the biggest focus to help determine if the child is moving forward to the next grade? The political answer is that all of them are very important to make sure that your child is making adequate progress. We don't necessarily say if your child didn't do well on one exam, then your child is going to be held over. That's not the case. We're actively monitoring and looking at all of the results for every child and recognizing what we can do. And we do recognize that some children might do much better on MAP than they do on STEP. STEP is an individualized exam, much different from MAP. MAP is all online, irregardless of whether or not we were remote or in person. And some students just don't do well in that regard. So all of these exams are very important. Your teachers know exactly how your child did on each one of these exams, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that they are at or above grade level. Do the kids get the same amount of time for taking the test? So MAP is an untimed exam. So it gets harder as it goes on. So if a child comes back and tells you, oh my God, I was on that test and it looked like it was hours, then that means it's a good thing. If a child said, oh, I was only on it for 5 minutes, I thought it was very easy, that's not a good thing. And we can also tell whether or not your child was guessing on the exam or just clicking C. We're able to tell how long they were spending on each question.
Jill, Libby, anything you'd add to that too?
Just adding on to what Dr. Kirkland said, that's another great question to ask teachers of how long did my scholar spend on taking the MAP assessment? All of that information is included in their student profile. And so that's a really big indicator of were they actually taking the time to read versus not. And then I do want to just state for some of the classroom assessments, those are given within the same amount of time. So things like the IAs and the biweeklies, they get the same amount of time as if they would in the classroom. And I also know, you know, I know IEPs came up. There also teachers have been working to make sure that those students get those accommodations by doing those assessments in breakout rooms, things like that. So that is like what would happen in person.
There's a question about the report cards. So the parents are able to log on to the portal, the parent portal in PowerSchool, to be able to retrieve their child's report card. But let's just say in the worst case scenario, you're not able to get onto the portal or something bad happened. It's not a problem. All teachers and all schools are going to have access to a PDF of your child's report card that you can be able to get access to directly in the conference. So that won't be an issue. Teresa Martinez has a question that's written in Spanish. So that's like Spanish 3. I'm not able to understand the word rendarium.
I'm going to make sure Patria has a chance to finish translating, and then she can make sure she's answering that as well.
Yeah, and Corey, I just want to add on to what Dr. Kirkland said about, you know, one parent asked like what assessment is used to determine like if they're moving to the next grade level. Like Dr. Kirkland said, we take a comprehensive view of scholars' progress. We monitor year-long looking at various data points. But what you will see is that if your scholar is below the 30th percentile on their MAP test, that is an indicator that they may be considered for another year of learning. And so if you're a returning family, you know that in trimester 2, when we start to look at those progress reports and report cards, we notify families if any of the indicators show us that the scholar may be eligible for another year of learning. And MAP is one of the assessments, again, below the 30th percentile would indicate to us that the scholar is pretty significantly below where they need to be. The other thing about MAP we really focus on is student growth. So it's not about every student meeting the same level of proficiency. It's about looking at where did they start this year? Are they on track to meet their own growth goals? Because we believe if scholars sit in our seats for a full year of learning, they need to make at least a full year's worth of growth, if not more, with targeted interventions. And so I think when you're talking to your scholars teacher about MAP, you're not only going to want to ask like, what was their percentile, right? So where did they, perform overall? But when we get to winter MAP, you're going to want to know, are they on track for growth? Right? Because that is something MAP shows us that no other assessment does. And Joanne, I think I just answered your question there. It does not impact their grades, but because it is an indicator of progress, both of student mastery, right? Students' measure of proficiency and also their growth, we do inform parents of it in the comment, but it does not impact their class placement, and it doesn't go in the grade book as a grade.
There's a question. Thanks, Principal Strong. And Patria, you're good on translation? Awesome. There's a question about virtual workshops for math. So I don't know, Libby, if you want to tackle that, but are there any workshops coming up for math?
Sure, I can talk about our daily math instruction, which is very naturally investigative. We use investigations in the younger grades and open up in our middle schools, as well as story problems. And so these actually provide a lot of opportunities for our students to solve problems collaboratively and share and discuss their strategies and ideas in sort of like a workshop type model. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
All right, I think that might be it on the questions, but these were great questions and we really appreciate them. And so we're gonna wrap up here. Again, families, we're so glad that you joined tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time and hope that you'll Keep an eye on your inbox because the newsletter on Thursday will have some additional resources. And I wrote down a lot of the questions that came up as well, so we could think about what other supports we can share during the upcoming Chat and Choose. And as we get further into the assessment season, as Jill and Libby mentioned some of the assessments that are coming up. Jill, Libby, thank you again so much for your expertise tonight. And families, we really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you again soon for another webinar like this. Thanks, everyone.